Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is Novel Conversations. I'm author Mara Purl, and my friend and guest today is David Acuff. So
Hello.
we'll, we'll start off by introducing ourselves briefly. I write the Milford-Haven novels, which is women's fiction. It's set in the Central Coast of California. The books are bestsellers these days, I'm very grateful to say. And um, Part of the series does take place during the holidays. And I especially wanted to invite Dave to share his holiday book today because we have some interesting differences in our approach to the holidays and some interesting, I would say coincidences or similarities too. So tell us about your book, Dave.
As Mara said, I'm David Acuff. Been a filmmaker for about 30 years and have written scripts and done short films and corporate videos and all that kind of stuff. In 2014, I moved to LA, and then that's where I've made my home for the last 10 years almost. And now I'd started out turning some of my screenplays into novels, like the novelization process. And so that helped me kind of get into the book world for the first time, which is just very addictive, as you know. That's it's a fun world. So it's been fun to meet other authors and kind of start this journey. I had so many questions in the beginning, and Mara has been a fount of knowledge
Oh,
on everything. But even the little things, like when you first told me, all right, fiction novels have cream colored pages instead of the white pages. And that was just news to me. But can you expand on that a little bit? Just because some people don't know about that little rule,
oh,
but
yes, yes. So, first of all, you mentioned this journey from working in film and then novelization, and then that was your pathway into writing novels. You're one of the few people with whom I share that path. Most, for most people, they write a novel and then it may get made into a film, right? You and I went sort of backwards.
Mhm.
So in my case, I created a radio drama. I used to be a performer on Days of Our Lives on television, had done a lot of television and theater work, then created my own soap, but I did it for radio. And then it became a hit on the BBC, and that attracted publishers who said, "Did you ever think of creating a book series out of this?" And I secretly did always want to do that, and the moment arrived. And I totally agree with you. It really is addictive. So, but it's been such a journey to really learn because you and I knew about dialogue and arc of story and plot
Mhm.
points and things that come to us from the script world,
Mhm.
but we didn't know publishing practices and some of the really special things about creating a book. A book needs to be a work of art in graphical elements and in print elements. You and I share a friendship with a wonderful master printer, Bill Bercuda, and he has taught me quite a bit. And I've learned from a number of other people too. So, for example, the font Times Roman was created for newsprint, newspapers, the Times. And printing on white paper, the expression seeing things in black and white came from the nonfiction world of news. Therefore, white paper is preserved for nonfiction, and Times Roman is preserved for nonfiction.
Mhm.
So when you come to a novel, the moment you open it, it's on a different color paper because you're entering a different world. You also choose special fonts to coordinate with the topic that
Mhm.
your book is about. And so working with professional book designers who help you, choose everything from what's called the leading and the gutters and the whole style of each page
Mhm.
is really a design element just as much as the covers are. So we're responsible for the text, the content, but then our publishers help us create this work of art.
Mhm.
And even though a lot of our books are now in ebook form, that styling comes into ebooks as well.
Mhm.
And so I think readers who may not know all these details, but they do know that something hits them right,
Right,
something
right,
appeals, as they're
right.
drawn into and invited into these worlds that we create. So,
And the other gatekeepers that we have to get past as authors, whether it's the publishers or whether it's somebody, hey, will you put my book in your store or your library? They know some of these rules. And so that as they're
oh,
flipping
yes.
through your book, as indie authors, they're looking through your book and they're keeping track of, hey, margins, or so all those things you mentioned, they know about. And so as new authors, when you come into this world, it's like, hey, there's rules. And if you need to learn them, just like anywhere, you need to learn them and then decide what you can throw away and what you're going to switch up. But initially, you need to play by some of these rules because they're weeding you out if you're not playing certain things. So anyways, that was just a fascinating part of the kind of that film to novel writing journey,
Yeah.
which was kind of culminated last year. I'm sitting with my mom for Christmas, watching these Hallmark movies that we all love, but they're a little saccharine sweet. They're a little sappy and predictable. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, you know what this, holiday movie needs? Vampires and monsters. and, and so, yeah, so I that's when I first had the idea for Sleigh Bells Ring, emphasis on the sleigh, where
Yeah.
you have this guy that is I call him Dan Helsing. So his history, his family history is there too. He's a math teacher in Banner Elk. He doesn't even know about his long family history of Van Helsing, his great 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 grandfather, who was the most famous monster slayer of all time, arguably. And he's now several generations removed in the small town of Banner Elk. And at Christmas time, suddenly this portal opens up, bad things start coming through, and he's now got to start engaging his family's heritage, some of the tools that start showing up unexpectedly on his doorstep, and the people that start coming into his life. So it was just a kind of a fun romp, but it all kind of fit. I wanted it to fit within that Hallmark frame of some of the same tropes that they dealt with. The big town sheriff that she doesn't like this small town, but she's coming home after a while, and he's the small town math teacher that in Hallmark movies they're secretly the prince or something. I don't just work at this tree lot. I'm the governor, or I'm the mayor of the town. Something like there's always that twist in there. So yeah, so he's like, I'm not just a math teacher. I'm this monster slayer. This legacy of monster slayers in my family. So it was just kind of a fun twist to me on some of these holiday stories. So I ran with it.
Oh, yeah. Oh, and it's charming and delightful, and it has a lot of interesting depth. And when I wrote my holiday stories,
Mhm.
I also wanted to step a little bit out of bounds.
Mhm.
So I have two kind of companion novellas, and one features Cornelius, who's my astronomer guy, and one features Miranda, who's my painter protagonist. And as these stories begin in the overall saga, they don't actually know each other. They know of each other and they've seen each other because they're living in this little town. But he also is an adventure person and he likes to hike in the mountains. So we start with him, and he gets in trouble on a, it seems to be a gorgeous day, but a sudden storm comes in on the mountains and he finds himself trapped there. So, and then the second novella, we go to her, and she's doing, I think, a very Hallmarky Christmas, because
Mhm.
she's doing a handmade Christmas this year. So she's making everything from placemats to little small paintings, and she's been working on this for weeks so that every person who's special in her life is going to receive one of these little paintings. And the town is all decorated for Christmas, and we have lovely recipes and cinnamon rolls and, you know, a lot of the traditional things that we kind of go to for feeling good in the holidays.
Mhm.
But then something strange happens, and she gets an intuition that she needs to paint this strange mountain escarpment, which doesn't seem to have anything to do with Christmas or the holidays. And she doesn't know who it would be for, but she trusts her intuition. And so then we come to find out what she's painting and why and what the connections will be. I would say I don't necessarily step into the horror genre in this, but I do step into the paranormal,
Mhm.
as the things that happen both to him and then to her can't be explained by the usual logic.
Mm.
There's some extreme intuition, which I think in the holidays, a lot of us refer to it as the magic of the
Mhm.
holidays. So I wanted to tap into that. Oh, and then I wanted to mention that you and I narrated these stories for the audiobooks.
That's
So
right.
I got to play the painter and you got to play the astronomer. And boy, that was really fun
Mhm.
to sort of, you know, delve into these. But in the process, we realized that both of us are doing something a little different. It's the holidays, but it's the holidays with a twist. And you know, I think something important that your story deals with is there's a lot of expectation during the holidays that everything's going to be cozy and wonderful,
Mhm.
and you're going to get along with all your relatives, and every recipe is going to be perfect, and all of that. And that puts a lot of pressure on everyone.
Yes.
Some people don't have the greatest time during the holidays. Some people have a terrible time during the holidays. So, what you do is you bring in this extreme uh, cross genre
Mhm.
idea. You give people a chance to laugh at the very things that might otherwise hurt them.
It's kind of a found family sort of a situation too, because he's on his own as a single guy in this town. But then you're kind of, as a lot of us do in LA, you know, you start to find these friends that become family and become important people, you know, as you move forward, as you and Larry have, for me certainly. And so that's it's kind of a nugget of this story, is that he's, you know, the chapter one of these stories is usually about kind of building that team, that Scooby-Doo team
Oh,
of, you know,
yes.
how did these guys get together, and how did, yeah. So that was an interesting thing to kind of, you know, he's got to create this sort of a pseudo family that he's going to be working with and fighting these monsters with. And yeah, it's set up against this very cozy background. There's just something delightful about a small town Christmas. And I had visited the real Banner Elk in North Carolina. My sister lives just 20 minutes from there in Boone, and another quaint mountain town. And so we had visited there and just seen some locations. And I'm, you know, after I decided to write the book, you know, and I'm taking notes on this place and that place and just things that I want to include. And the Banner Elk Cafe, there's a diner that's there that I wanted to include. And so stuff like that, where I'm just taking great notes, and they all just kind of pepper into the story. And Banner Elk is great at Christmas Day because they have all these beautiful decorations, and a lot of people come from Raleigh, North Carolina, and the big cities, because they go up there to Boone in that area to cut down Christmas trees and bring those home. And so it's a huge kind of a Christmas, that season is a huge moneymaker for them and just a huge time. So yeah.
A number of years ago, Larry and I took our daughter and son-in-law to Cambria, which
Mhm.
is the real town, very close to my fictional town of Milford-Haven. And we had a terrific Christmas there. And you bet I was taking a lot of notes too. Um, Again, similar that a lot of us from Los Angeles drive up to the Central Coast. It's about 4 hours away, which makes it too far to sort of go up there all the time. Just far enough away to give it its own identity. And it's very special all the time. But during the holidays, everyone goes all out. The beautiful little shops and how everything is decorated, and special traditions arise. And it's so, I think repetition may be part of the thing about the holidays, that each year you give a special gift, or you sing a special song, or all those things kind of reassure us. We work hard all year, and then we get to have these special connections during the holidays. And of course, for many years before I was married, I also created my found family in LA, and I'm still very close to my friends here. And so trying to bring in those elements. So yes, we're writing fiction, but we're drawing upon our own experiences, or the experiences
Absolutely.
that we've observed. And the old adage, write what you know, is important, right? Because this is very authentic. I'm not just making up feelings. I know how these things feel, either because I've felt them myself, or I've really listened to friends to hear what they're thinking, what they're going through. So that idea of setting is really important in your story and in mine, in that it's almost a character unto itself, that these stories had to be located just where we put them.
Right.
And the authenticity of those details, that when I say a bottle brush plant is blooming, I need to make sure it's in the right month. Because people who live there will say, no, that you can't see that in April. Those things are important. So that's the research part.
We talked about the difference between pantsers and plotters.
Yes.
People that write by the seat of their pants, and the people that have to plot everything out beforehand and outline and then write into it. And for me, some of those heavy details come through on a second or third pass of the draft. In the beginning, if I say he shows up at the diner, I kind of have in mind what diner it's going to be. But in later versions, I needed to really get an idea of the town, of, all right, where exactly does he live? And looking on an actual map, finding an actual house and saying that's his house. And then, because you can find these things on Zillow. You can find these on Zillow, these beautiful homes and stuff, and see inside their homes. And then I could begin to, in the first pass, it's just he's in his home. But in the second pass, I need to start filling in a lot of details and looking at the home. It's 8 miles from this, which is now 8 miles from the middle school where he teaches. And so some of those details become more and more important. But on the first pass, I'm just, it's like a word vomit. I'm just trying to get, the big ideas down, and just, some of the dialogue and things like that. But on later passes, it's kind of like that refining wood, where you're just sanding it down and getting it smoother and smoother and smoother. And it's just, that's my process. I know everybody goes through the smoothing process, but mine, that first draft is really a lot rougher. But it's to get the highlights down. And then as I go through, I have to get the details.
That's very smart, because flow is a big thing in writing. A friend of mine, Margaret Cole, who's a New York Times bestselling author, and I talked about this once, and she was saying that her first novel wasn't as good as everything that followed, because she kept interrupting herself and trying to edit while she was still in the writing process. And she said, no, what you've got to do is let that river flow, capture it, and then you can work on it. And I agree, that is so important. As far as outlining and versus being a pantser, I guess I must do some of both, because I was coming from a radio drama with 10 major characters and probably 10 minor ones as well. It's a complex world, and I had to have a show Bible so that I didn't get out of sync. And I remember one almost disaster where I had one of the characters in two places at the same time.
Right.
Well, we weren't writing sci-fi, so we couldn't do that. So some outlining and
Right.
some sense of where we're going is necessary to create. I have these ribbons, and then I have to braid them, together.
Mm-hmm.
But within any given scene or narrative description, it's all about listening and letting it flow.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know where it's going to go at that point. And also, I've had characters go, "Hey, I'm not
Yeah.
going over there. I'm actually going over here."
Right.
Okay. So much of writing is listening, I find. I mean, I hear my characters
Yeah.
talk to each other, yell at each other,
Mm-hmm.
whatever they need to do.
Mm-hmm.
I know people who aren't writers may think we're a little bit haughty. Um, I had a friend who used to say, "Well, good night, everyone," because I had all these characters running around in my head. But I think that is part of the process, and we're listening for truths. I like to say that nonfiction is about facts,
Mm-hmm.
and fiction is about truth.
Mm-hmm.
It's this big, powerful lens that you train on issues of life, and you get to see them enact themselves. I think if you let them, the characters will create their own story. If you
Mm-hmm.
let them do what they would do and not force them to do things they wouldn't do,
Right.
that fascinating.
I think I've become a little more character driven in my approach. The plot is obviously, I always want a high concept sort of a plot to kind of move along to. That's the spine. But the character driven side of it, I studied a lot of these TV shows and, things like Friends, where you have this group of six. And so these six people with all very different personalities, but they've created such clear cut personalities that you can drop those six people or these three and those three into any situation. And it almost begins to write itself because you
Yes.
know what Chandler's going to be
Yeah.
saying. Could this be any more crazy than, so with the right characters that you've built up beforehand and you've kind of charged them with these traits, these foibles, to have a guy with this family history of vampire and monster hunting that doesn't even have a clue that that's part of his legacy. That's a very, Luke Skywalker thing.
Mm-hmm.
He's just a farm boy in this little small town, and he doesn't know that he's got all this legacy that's about to just drop on his head. But that to me is a very delicious setting where you've got this impending something that even the audience knows that he doesn't know yet. And so he just wants to be a math teacher. He just wants to, and in fact, he doesn't even want to be a math teacher. He wants to be an actuary. He wants to sit in a cubicle
Oh, wow.
at Blue Cross Blue Shield in his little cubicle and just compute numbers all day. And so you start out with that. If he's got to end up being a monster hunter and he's got to go out on these adventures and all this kind of stuff, it's just so delicious to start them out back here where he's like, just give me my safe cubicle, my nice life, and I'm happy.
Yeah,
It's like,
Indiana Jones,
yes.
the
So
reluctant adventurer.
yes. To me, that's just a delicious kind of a formula. And then in this one, you had like an Obi-Wan character that kind of knows what's going on, that's explaining and has to help training. Well, in this one, it's this 15-year-old girl that's been like this monster slayer her whole life. So she's in the Slayer Guild, so there's guilds. He's learning about all this whole world of things. So there's a guild for monster slayers, yes, and she's been in it her whole life, and so she's very saddened that the one she's been waiting for this whole time is this clueless her math teacher that she didn't even know was the one the whole time. And so now she's having to train him and become his Obi-Wan Kenobi. But again, having that grown up and kid dynamic, to me, that's
Nice.
just another one of
Very
those
nice.
delicious
Yeah.
kind of push
No,
pull
that is
things
great.
it's just fun to explore. So
I was thinking about what you were saying. There's this two elements came up. One of them was the sense of purpose
Mhm.
and allowing characters to find their purpose.
Mhm.
And that's really the arc of the story.
Mhm.
And then the other is the sort of square peg in a round hole issue.
Right.
So, for example, my character, Miranda, grew up in a family of privilege, and she has a sister. Um, they're all rather driven, very successful, and Miranda keeps up with that for years. And but something doesn't fit.
Mhm.
And finally, she just sort of bursts out of there, and she's living in the Bay Area, and she drives down to the Central Coast just to sort of get away and clear her head.
Mhm.
Before she goes, she does a sketch, and it's an odd lighthouse made of stone, surrounded by brambles and nearly hidden by overgrown trees.
Mhm.
It's just something from her imagination. Well, she's driving along and suddenly sees exactly what she sketched.
Mhm.
So she pulls off the highway, and it turns out she's opposite this sign that says, Milford-Haven.
Mhm.
And that's what makes her pull into this town.
Huh.
And then all kinds of synchronicity begins to happen. She goes into a diner. I have also the diner in
Mhm.
town, Sally's. And she's chatting with Sally and sort of strikes up an acquaintanceship with her, but her conversation is overheard by someone who's looking for a painter to do a mural.
Mhm.
Miranda just basically trained herself to do murals for the
Mhm.
first time in the past
Mhm.
previous months. So she thinks she just stopped to maybe get lunch, but now she gets a job.
Mhm.
So, everything just sort of pulls her in this direction. And she moves there, and the story begins. And everyone thinks she's nuts. Her parents are going, "What?" Her sister says, You've really gone off the rails. Her manager doesn't even want to manage her anymore. So logically, it's not making sense.
Mhm.
But from the perspective of the heart, which I think is intuition,
Mhm.
it does make sense. And she finds the courage to go with that. So I think that's, this core thing about finding who you really are,
Mhm.
finding your core purpose. You mentioned your character finding out this legacy he didn't know he had.
Mhm.
It's sort of all about identity.
Mhm.
Who am I really?
Mhm.
When am I going to find out? And if not now, when?
Right.
And it's almost like the story itself erupts out of this need to
Mhm.
discover
Mhm.
who we are.
Right.
And so, in one sense, we're writing about these fictional characters, but in another sense, we're inviting our readers to say, what about you?
Mhm.
What legacy do you have?
For sure.
What core purpose have you not discovered yet because you never gave yourself a chance?
Mhm.
I just, I love that idea of just sort of cherishing that heart sense within us
Oh, for
and
sure.
letting it be the guidance. We don't know where it's going to take us.
Mhm. I think in one respect that's why writing is addictive for us, because it's almost like therapy, because we're dealing with some things on the page and exploring things from our own lives and inserting them into situations and letting them play out and seeing different outcomes than maybe we had had, or maybe sometimes they're better or sometimes they're worse than what we had chosen in real life. But yeah, it can be a type of therapy, or dealing with people, like if they've treated us roughly in the past and then bringing them into fiction. Okay, now you're the bad guy, like you're the first victim of the man
Revenge is
there.
sweet.
Yes.
Yes. No,
So
I agree. I think disentangling the interlaced ambiguities, as one
mhm,
writer put it, is part of the storytelling. It's like we go along in life and then we come to a big knot,
mhm,
and we have to decide, okay, can I disentangle this thing now? Sometimes we just walk around it, but we know it's back there. We're going to have to
mhm,
get to it at some point. And some people just step right up and say, okay, this is the issue. I'm going to deal with it right now. And some are reluctant. And I see that in my characters. I see the results of delaying this kind of work. It doesn't really go well as people move on in life and they have damaged their relationships, they have damaged their careers, whatever, because they haven't dealt with these things.
Hmm.
And then I see the joy of saying, wow, that was hard, but now I know better. And life is going to be greatly improved. And so unintentionally, I guess we're teaching lessons, but they're the lessons that we're teaching ourselves first.
Right. And the liberty to kind of beg, borrow, and steal from every person in our lives, and every trait that, like, for my main character, that idea of being a math teacher moving to an actuary is very much my brother-in-law, so having watched that unfold over the last 8 years, gave me a lot of insights into his mind and how he worked, and that kind of stuff, and his love for games like Settlers of Catan and stuff like that, which also has a seat at the table here with the Orphan Fight Club, I called it. But yeah, so a lot of those, I like to take the character that I've imagined, but then overlay a very real person that I know well, so that I can kind of round out a lot of the details and some of the jokes, for example, or some of the things he likes or that he's allergic to, or things like that, where it just really helps me, almost like a shortcut, to have real people to kind of overlay onto as
The
a
anchor.
reference. Yeah,
Yeah.
an anchor for sure. Yes.
I was writing Miranda's parents and realized, boy, they sound a lot like my parents. And
Uh-huh.
so I had a sit down with my folks,
Hmm.
who both of whom were in the theater and had a very clear understanding of storytelling, and they were fans of Milford-Haven in the first place.
Mhm.
But I said, how would you feel, though, if these characters, good elements and bad, resemble you? Because I won't do it if it's harmful
Right.
or hurtful
Right.
to you. And they both said, oh, no, this is legitimate. This is your experience. You
Mhm.
need to write what you know,
Right.
what you feel. And then my mother went on to say, she said, I'm actually flattered, you know. So
Right.
I was lucky.
Hmm.
Some writers run into big problems
Mhm.
with writing basically about fictionalized versions, but thinly disguised, of
Right.
family members. Um, I know it can be painful, um, but ultimately, the goal, if you're writing novels, the goal is not to hurt others,
Right.
but to reveal things that need to be faced.
Right. Like, even in the picking, like you said, the town, the setting is a character as well. And to do that with the town, because I know on a very small stage with Banner Elk, that's driven a few sales. When I went to have a book signing down there last Christmas, it was fun to set up shop, and they're like, hey, this is Banner Elk. Oh, we want to read this. I was like, yeah, there's vampires in Banner Elk. Who knew? And then, so we had fun with it. But I know that your town was kind of based on a real town as well, that you had an awesome trip over there to go to build a relationship with the real town of Milford-Haven, which was,
Yes, yes. Well,
when did
I
you get
have.
to do that? What year was that you got to go over there?
Well, I've been over a few times.
Okay.
Um, I'm kind of linked to two real towns.
Okay.
So when I first started uh, the radio show, I had spent a summer in Cambria, California,
Mhm.
doing a play.
Mhm.
And so by night, I was busy in the theater. And by day, I was exploring, gee, what is life like in a little town? I grew up in Tokyo, and then I lived in New York, and then LA. So what I knew about a little town was nothing.
Right.
I had everything to learn, and I found it really fascinating. While I was doing research, I found out that Cambria is the English name for Wales.
Mm.
So then I started looking at Wales, looking at maps, looking at history. On the map of Wales, there was a town called Milford-Haven. And I found this while I was looking for a fictional name for my town.
Gotcha.
And I thought it needs to be related to Wales because the name Cambria came from Wales.
Mm.
So here was this town. And as I looked into it more, it was strangely synchronous with my
Mhm.
fictional town. I mean, it's on the west coast of Wales with a rugged coastline with many other elements. So then my show went on to the BBC and became a local hit, and it was beneficial to the real town of Milford-Haven because
Mm.
it helped them with tourism.
Nice.
Invited me to visit, and when I got there, I was absolutely shocked because they gave me a parade and a reception in town
Nice.
hall and initiated this beautiful relationship. And Larry and I went back last year and did a literacy project with
Mm.
local students in Milford-Haven.
Mm.
So it's very dear to me and it's a special place. And then meanwhile, in Cambria and in the Central Coast, since I've been going there for so many years and doing all my research and doing book events, I have a community there of fellow authors.
Mhm.
When I started writing this series, no one else was writing about the Central Coast. Now there are several others.
Mm.
So I invite them to do events with me. And so
Nice.
we go to local bookstores and have a blast,
Nice.
you know, sharing stories. And then a lot of my readers find me there at
Mm.
writing conferences and webinars, seminars, book
Mhm.
signings. It's very rich, right, to be in that author community and our readers. I feel like it's a conversation with our readers so much of the time. What's going on for them, and how can we inspire them, give them. Sometimes reading is just pure escape,
Mhm.
and there's nothing wrong with that. And sometimes it's much deeper, as we were discussing,
Mhm.
and that's great too.
I keep learning new things about the journey, and I haven't gotten to a point where a story has created a large enough fan base where I'm then like you have, where you've met the townspeople of your fictional town that's a real town, and then it kind of how that plays out. So it's kind of that's a fun journey for later. But with the George R. Martins and those guys that are like, all right, given all this feedback on these 3 books, now I'm writing the next book. How does that change the trajectory or not change of where he goes with his future books? So some of those bigger authors have to deal with that. So I hope to have that problem one day.
Oh, I'm sure you will. Another thing that you and I have talked about briefly is journals and journaling.
Oh, yes.
And there's the personal practice of journaling, and then there is the presenting of journaling in our writing. I have been keeping a journal for many, many years, sometimes in more detail than others, but that process of reflecting
Mhm.
on what's going on is an important one. And one of my characters, Samantha, is a journaler, and each of my novels concludes with her journal.
Hmm.
And it's a chance for me to sort of let it rip about the issues that I've been dealing with in that book.
Mhm.
She's an environmentalist. It gives me a chance to bring in some pretty heavy duty research about whatever specific environmental or wildlife issue might come up in that story.
Hmm.
And she draws together the themes of that book
Hmm.
that readers may have noticed or may not have noticed.
Hmm.
And it's a favorite chapter for some of my readers. It's an irritating chapter for some other of my readers who's like,
Mhm.
yeah, I don't care about all that. I just want the story. In
Right.
which case they can end when
Yeah.
the chapters, the last chapter before the journal begins. But I think it's an interesting echo of the themes. And you've done something very interesting with this book with
Mhm.
journaling.
Well, and that's part of my essential writer process. That's my, if I had any kind of a writing hack to tell people, it was this. Staring at the blank page can be so daunting sometimes when you're thinking in terms of your novel and what's coming in the next chapter. So I always jump over to my journal first when I sit down to write, and I say how many words I'm up to and the date. And so some of those little clarifications. And then I get into, where did I leave off yesterday? And it's just free flow, just whatever I want to write. I can write about what I had for coffee. I can write about anything that comes to mind. And it's just to get typing, just to get the words flowing. So after about 10 to 15 minutes of that, then I can pause and I can jump over. And now, the oils are greased, and so you're ready. The pump is primed, and you jump over to your book and you kind of start wading into there. So I had done that for this whole book. So half of the book is the story, so the first half is the story. And then the last half is all the writing journal, which is really the making of the book. So there's certain, like when I thought these two characters were going to be like twin sisters. And so I'm writing that in the journal. It's like, I've thought of this new character. I think she's in this kind of relationship with this other character. And then as I went through the book, I was like, nope, she is not her. They were just roommates, because that was, the one relationship created a stronger dynamic and more stuff that you had to deal with. And this other relationship, she was almost demoted to a more minor character because she didn't show up throughout the book. So stuff like that, where it's like the evolution of a character, where you thought she was going to be this central character, but she turned out not to be as main of a character. And then other characters that were side characters that suddenly they're in the big battle scene at the end where you didn't anticipate that. So some of that plays out through the journal, of where I'm thinking, I just discovered this person, or I just realized somebody needs to die in this chapter.
Oh.
And as I'm realizing that on paper, it's like this, I don't know how I feel about this. What's it going to do? Or is this the right choice or not the right choice? And it's like, no, they do have to die in this chapter. I was like, okay, let's, and then you jump over here and you start writing the chapter. But yeah, the journaling process always helped me to kind of get into the writing session each time. And then to have something at the end of it to kind of show my own progress was just kind of fun to look back on. So I've enjoyed that.
It is a wonderful process. I sometimes teach, and I'm part of the faculty of publishing at sea. My friend and colleague Judith Briles founded this, and I've been a faculty member a few times. So I'm doing it again in a couple of months, and these kinds of techniques. How do we overcome, all the busyness that's in our head, that in one sense we have to quiet it in order to hear what's going on within ourselves and what might be going on in the story. It's a very helpful thing.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we love Judith. She's great.
She is great. So another thing that I just want to hit on again, and it's a nice segue, is humor. And you talked about minor characters who surprisingly, start having sort of more of a life than we thought. So I have these adventure novellas where my character Miranda goes off on a painting excursion. She has to do her research. And I've got 3 of these so far. And in the first one, this strange character that she calls Mrs. Lime shows up. Miranda is painting plein air in a garden, and it's a public space. And this woman comes over and starts saying, "Listen, dearie, one of these days you'll learn how to paint, but not yet." And Miranda is like, "I didn't ask your opinion, excuse me." And so this character is tremendously irritating and obnoxious and very funny. Well, in the second adventure, Miranda can scarcely believe it, but here she is again. And this time her husband is there trying to sort of tamp things down and say, "Listen, dear, maybe you shouldn't mention." So then she has more. And then she showed up again in the third one, and there's quite a bit more enough that we finally get a little bit of compassion
Hmm.
for why she is so irritating. But that really surprised me. I had no, initial intention of, well, I need comic relief. I'm going to add this character. But boy, she just, walked right in. And I
Mhm.
love having that humor. Now,
Right.
humor is really in your wheelhouse. I
Oh
mean,
yeah,
it's a
yeah.
specialty for you.
Yeah, and I've actually leaned more into it in the past because I've done some YA dramas, so some young adult dramas, and even in those, I try to infuse the drama with a lot of humor because that really helps you. Charlie Chaplin was the one that said, if you want to end with a tear, you start with a smile.
Mm.
So for his stories, he always did that. So he gets you laughing, but then by the end, you have that poignant moment, and it only works because you've balanced it. And so that's for the YA dramas. I try to infuse with a lot of humor with some of the characters as well, but too because it was such heavy subject matter. And in this one, I went with a first person narrator. So Dan Helsing is the narrator
Right,
of the
right.
story, and so that allowed a lot more humor opportunity, even in the descriptions, because we're seeing the world through his eyes. And he is, as we find out, he's a very unreliable narrator. So things that he said that you take for granted, it's like, oh, he said it was this way, it must be this way. And then if you find out some stuff later, it's like, oh, wait a second, he's we can't trust this guy fully because he's just thoughts, a very Ryan Reynolds type, where he's just constantly spewing out a bunch of stuff, stream of consciousness, and that's his style. And humor to deflect, and humor to, in scary situations, it's just his go-to. So that was kind of fun to write, and just kind of unleash some of
Yeah.
that, which
Oh,
which
it's
normally
great.
I do have to filter down. So
Well, I think it's great anytime, but maybe especially during the holidays.
oh
And
sure.
what you mentioned about POV, point of view,
Mhm.
that's a big thing for us, for authors. The journals at the end of my novels are first person.
Right.
The rest of the narrative, I have intermittent moments where we go into internal thoughts, where
Mhm.
the character is speaking to herself or himself. But for the most part, it's, you know, omniscient, it's third person. But POV is a really important thing in writing, and something that is a pet peeve of mine. I don't know how you feel about this, is what I call head jumping.
Mm.
So let's say it's a dinner scene. I've got Miranda and Zach having dinner.
Mhm.
The first part of the scene, I'm with Zach. Therefore, we can see what he can see. He can see out the window, he can see the lighthouse, he can see the door to the kitchen, he can see the waiters coming out with the food, he can see the main door to the restaurant. But the
Mhm.
rest of the scene, I want to see and feel what she's experiencing. So then we cross the table. Well, then I can't mention the lighthouse because it's behind her. She can't see it,
Mm.
etc. And I prefer having that sort of integrity of the camera. I think it
Mhm.
comes because of, working in theater and
Mhm.
television. What bothers me is when authors go boing, 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 boing. And I'm like, wait,
Mhm.
I feel jarred by that
Right.
experience. I sometimes lose track, like, wait a minute, who's kissing who here?
Right. Right.
I get confused.
Yeah. That was the first wall that I hit when I was going from screenplays to novels was POV.
Mm.
Suddenly the whole world opened up, and it was like, all right, I can be in their head, I can be third person, I can be first person, all these different choices that I had to make. So it really stopped me for a couple months before I started writing my first book to look into that. And so there was what's his name? Orson Scott Card. I think
Mhm.
he's
Yeah.
he's a sci-fi writer and has a lot of good, but he has a lot of great informational books on his process, and one of them was about point of views and characters and point of views or something like that. And it was just, I was just drinking it up. So I was like, oh, okay, this is how you do it. And really to understand that even though you're in this omniscient point of view, it's a limited omniscient point of view, because you want it to be limited, because you don't want to just, like you said, just bound inside of everybody's thoughts and what they're thinking and what they're, it's like you've got to pick. And if you jump to somebody's else's head, it's got to be a more of a formal jump, and you can't just do it in the same paragraph, certainly. But yeah, it's there's a little more, like I said, there's rules like that will trip you up in the beginning. But point of view was, I'm still learning that, and that working with editors helped me a lot to be able to rein that in, where they're like, all right, you need to rewrite this paragraph from his point of view instead of hers, because everything else is in his point of view, and you just crossed over and came back. So it's like, oh yes, thank you for
Yeah.
pointing that.
Well, you can, as you said earlier, you have to know the rules. Then you can
Mhm.
sort of pick the ones you might want to
Mhm.
break.
Mhm.
You can choose your style or let it evolve.
Mhm.
For me, I realized I wanted to be rather strict
Mhm.
with staying in one person's perspective. And that gives me a chance to sort of get around to everyone. So ultimately, we're going to know what everyone saw. There are writers who stay, I'd say, more firmly in the drone view. They hover way
Yep.
above the story, and they focus on the events, which can be seen clearly from that overview or that master shot.
Mhm. Mhm.
Maybe they're not quite so interested in the internal thoughts that are driving the characters. Maybe it's more of a plot driven story,
Mhm.
and that's legitimate.
Mhm.
I had a debate with a wonderful author one time about men's fiction and women's fiction.
Mhm.
And at first he said, his name is Andrew Clavin, and he writes pretty hard boiled, what I would call men's fiction.
Okay.
He's a fabulous writer.
Mhm.
And he said, Mara, there's no such thing as men's fiction. And I said, there is if there's women's fiction. And so he's
Mhm.
like, okay. So we had this debate at a writers' conference, and it was really interesting. It's not like it's two buckets, but it's a continuum.
Mhm.
And so I would say the elements of men's fiction that we started to identify were things like velocity and a driving sense of plot.
Mhm.
And whereas women's fiction has a lingering sense over the details. So if we go back to a dinner scene,
Mhm.
if it's women's fiction, you find out the color of the tablecloths, the aromas that's coming out of the kitchen, what flowers are on the tables, what kind of sparkle the ocean has out the window that day, what the waiters are wearing.
Mhm.
If it's men's fiction, he sits in such a way that his back is not to the main door.
Mhm.
He orders a steak, and the conversation begins.
Mhm. Mhm.
you know, and so I joke with Larry about, he'll ask me sometimes when he'll read an early manuscript, and it's like, why do I have to know all that? And I explained to him one time, well, in women's fiction, it's kind of a code. So
Mhm.
if I say that this woman is wearing Bruno Magli pumps, uh, she has a French twist, she has a Dior suit.
Mhm.
Well, I don't have to also then say she makes a lot of money, she's a professional woman, and she lives in the city.
Gotcha.
I've already said it by
Right.
describing exactly what she's wearing.
Nice.
And so in women's fiction, there is this code
Mhm.
that is, it's useful. And if it weren't there, boy, my readers would tell me about it. It's like,
Mhm.
you didn't even share. I didn't feel like I was there. That's my job. I need to stimulate all five senses
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
have my readers really feel that they are there in that restaurant, and they know what it felt like to have dinner in that lovely
Oh, for
oceanside
sure.
restaurant.
For sure. And that was again another skill that came had to be developed from screenwriting, where you're really only dealing with a couple senses, and to novel writing, where it's like, all right, what does it smell like? What does, is there a breeze? What does it feel like to be in that situation, or stuff like that, where it's, there's so much more to a taste. What does this taste like? And you're like, oh, well, that is, especially in the sci-fi stuff that I write, it's like, all right, he just put something in his mouth. What's that sensation for this food that we've
Yes.
never heard of, we've never seen before? And so it was kind of that was again a training of a new muscle to be able to. There was some of the feedback I got on my first sci-fi rough draft. He's like, I just want you to spend more time looking around and showing me the world and some of those details. I was like, oh yeah. Because in my scripts, you write sparsely just to get to the visual moments and the dialogue and things like that. And you leave out a ton of that other stuff. So adding in more layers of detail as you go to kind of immerse the audience correctly into the world, so that they feel like they're there and they're not just kind of watching it from a distance. There's an art and a science to it. So I
That is
appreciate
so
that.
true. An art and a science. I totally agree. Well, it's been so fun talking
Oh,
with you,
absolutely.
Dave, and I hope that our readers have wonderful holiday season
Mhm.
and that our books help them enjoy the fun, the horror, the humor, the cozy, all of
Yep,
that.
that's right. That's right. And just stay away from the vampires,
That's right.
emotional and otherwise.
Uh-huh.
That's the
Yes, yes.
that's the lesson
Great.
of my book, and they can be dealt with. So that, I think, if there was a moral to my story there, let's learn that at Christmas we can deal with our monsters and other people's monsters, and
Uh,
still have a blessed and Merry Christmas.
oh, yes, very much so. Wonderful Merry Christmas and happy holidays to all of our readers. And we will show you a couple of pages so you can find us. We love to hear from our readers, so please find us on Instagram and Facebook and your favorite social media. And if you'd like to sign up for my newsletter, you can go to my website and sign up right there. It comes out once a month, and I'll give you all the latest. And we'll see you next time on Novel Conversations.